Shadows can make your lettering stand out, but how do you add shadows? I put together 10 ways to add shadows to your lettering to help you understand. And as we go through them, you'll have to let me know your favorite way to add shadows because there are so many different ways. If you're new here, I'm Sarah from Ensign Insights. I teach hand lettering simply so you can feel good about where you are right now. To get started, let's talk about the basics of where a shadow goes. Think about your light source coming from one direction, which means your shadows just need to be on the opposite side of the light source. To keep it super simple for you, this is my trick. As I'm adding shadows, I always say to myself, to the right and under. You can add your shadows wherever you want. I just typically do them to the right and under. What do you think? Is that helpful? Where do you add shadows? All right, let's get into the different ways you can add shadows. I hope this can give you some inspiration because these definitely aren't the only things you can do. The first way is to add a black fine line as the shadow. I really like this one, especially since I do a lot of rainbow lettering and sometimes some colors don't stand out as much as other colors, for example, yellows, and that can make it really hard to read. But adding this black shadow brings it all together and makes it easier to read. You can see here I also added a thicker gray shadow just to give it a little dimension. The whole time I was thinking to the right and under. I did that same thing with one letter at a time. This quote here. By the way, these pens are Kentucky Clean Color Dot markers. If you want to see a full review of them, let me know. They're pretty unique because the tip is like a round dot. Number 2 is to add a white shadow. And this is actually a project from my book. I was really excited to be able to show you the picture in the book side by side with the actual project. I added this quote to the cover of this little notebook. I really like how the white shadow really pops on the tan background. And this is just one of the projects in my book where I show you something really simple that you can do as a beginner or get creative and come up with something of your own. Okay, number 3, the next type of shadow I will show you is to leave a little space between your letter and the shadow. It just adds a little more subtle dimension. These are my acrylograph paint pens from Archer & Olive. So I'm doing faux calligraphy to add the downstrokes so it looks like I used a brush pen. If you haven't heard of faux calligraphy, it's great. You can just use any regular pen and write your word and then you thicken the downstrokes. And then I'm just adding the gray line to the right and under with a little space in between. I also wanted to show you how I would add this with my brush pen. So I hand lettered heart with my Tombow dual brush pen, and then with the fine tip in the same color, I'm adding the shadow line with a space, but connecting it at the ends so it looks like a blocked shadow. There are so many things you could do with this, and if you make the blocked shadow big enough, you could add some cool doodles on the sides, maybe some stripes or dots or florals. There's so many different things you could do. You could make it look really chunky, like it's a huge block of letter. That would look really cool. And number 4 is to add a very basic gray shadow, but in a different way. So maybe you need help seeing where the shadow is. You can use a light box to trace. You can also use tracing paper for this. So I'm first tracing the word heart with a gray pen, and that's what my shadow is going to be. So I just move my paper very slightly, and I know where the shadow is supposed to be. And that way you don't even have to guess where your shadow needs to be. This could be really helpful if you are doing some type of shadow that is more complicated. I have seen people just do the shadow of a word, and this would be a great way to be able to do that. Have you seen that before? Number 5 is adding a shadow to monoline lettering. The trick with this is using a monoline pen that is waterproof. I'm using my Pilot Gold marker here, but you could also use a regular Sharpie because they're also waterproof. You can see all of the gold pens I've tried in my gold pen review if you want to see more of that. So for the shadows, I'm using my Marvy Le Pen Flex brush pens. They're great small brush pens. I love how in this look the word stands out and the shadow is just a subtle pop of color. Now, let me show you how it might look if you used a larger brush pen for the shadows. It's a much thicker shadow. So with the monoline word, Because you don't have that thick downstroke, you can do much thicker shadows. When you do a shadow this way with a waterproof pen, it's really nice that you can go over your word and not worry about ruining it. So which one do you like better? Using the small brush pen or using the large brush pen? I also did this with one of my rainbow watercolor background bookmarks that I make, and I added a black shadow to gold monoline lettering. I love how it makes the word courage pop even more. If you can tell, my Karen markers started bleeding on the paper slightly because when you use them directly on paper, it's a lot of ink for the paper to handle. So I just went in with a fine tip after and I smoothed out the edges. Number 6 is blending your shadows. I've seen several different variations of this on Instagram and I think they're all really nice. Have you seen this before? So I'm using a Sharpie stained fabric marker like I used for the intro. I love these as brush pens. They feel pretty similar to Karen markers, but they're waterproof. So although I wouldn't use them as watercolor like I do with my Karen markers, you can do some really cool things with them. So once it's dry, you can go in with any water-based pens that you want to blend. I'm using Karen markers, and I'm also using Bristol paper so you can blend on it. The type of paper you use is super important for blending. I wanted to touch up a few areas. I used my water brush to help with some of the blending. This is a really fun way to add something extra to your lettering. And there's so many possibilities. Next, with number 7, is adding metallic shadows. The tricky part about this is that metallic pens are opaque, which means if you go over your word, the metallic shadow will cover up the word, and that's not what you want. But I think a little shiny silver shadow looks so cool. So you have to be really careful and keep a steady hand to just give a fine line. And like always, you can see I'm just doing my shadows to the right and under. Another really cool metallic shadow is metallic on metallic using black paper. I used faux calligraphy again to get this look, same one as before. I'm using my Karen markers in the metallic colors. The nice thing about this is that if you accidentally go over your word, yes, it will be opaque, but the gold is opaque too, so you could go back in after it's dried and add some more gold to cover up any of your colors. I also tried this on my rainbow watercolor background, basically doing it opposite of my Courage bookmark that you saw earlier, this time with black lettering and a gold shadow. This one was a little trickier because I had to be careful with the gold since it's opaque, but I really like how it looks. I can't decide which one I like better. What do you think? The last 3 are a little different than shadows, but still the same technique, so I'm including them. This one, number 8, is something you have probably seen me do a lot. You do your regular brush pen lettering with a thick downstroke and then add a line next to the downstroke, leaving space in between. I love that this one kind of looks like a stripe. Having that contrast of the empty space is really eye-catching, and I think that's why I love it so much. Number 9 is a great way to start simple. All you do is letter your word with a very thin downstroke, and you could even do monoline lettering if you want, and then add a thick shadow just to the downstrokes. If you haven't gotten the hang of where the shadows are supposed to go yet, you probably at least know where your downstrokes go, and that is a really helpful way to be able to see where you're going to put your shadows. It's almost like a faux shadow while you're still practicing. The last shadow is a way to blend even more colors. I just added my shadow to the downstroke in each letter. I use the color of what the next letter would be so that it would blend and seem like a natural flow of colors. Because I'm using Karen markers again, I'm just letting them blend on their own. Oh, and I'm using watercolor paper for this. I normally don't use my pens on watercolor paper, but every once in a while I do use my Karen markers on watercolor paper. They're pretty durable. They will fray eventually, but of all my brush pens, they're the one that I trust on my watercolor paper. I am realizing that I think I used Karen markers a lot in this video. They're just my favorite, so I use them a lot. All right, this is just the start of so many types of different shadows you can do. It really is crazy to me what types of things people come up with, and doing really unique shadows. What other types of shadows have you tried? Let me know because maybe I need to try it. Thank you for watching. I hope this video helped you with your shadows. If it did, subscribe so you don't miss my next video. If you have any requests of a video you want to see or something you're struggling with that you think I can help you with, let me know in the comments. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time.